finding people that at their core have these traits and plug them into the team.
Welcome everyone to the Sports and Business Podcast. Today we have a special guest, Darcy McConvey. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Love being called special to jump into it. Appreciate that.
No, it was a pleasure to have you on. So Darcy, you're an NCAA D1 hockey player from Bowling Green State University. You're an academic All-American. We'd love to dive into that in a few minutes on how you got that honor, especially when it's really tough playing hockey and going to school at the same time. You played pro in the ECHL. You're the captain of the Idaho Steelheads. You also went to played hockey in Switzerland and Denmark. And then you made a great transition to business where you went to did your MBA, London School of Business. And today you're the director at Greybrook Realty Partners with real estate asset management with over $1 billion in deployed capital. Mm-hmm. Love to dive into all these things today. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been an interesting journey to say the least. And I think hockey, sports generally, but hockey kind of sets you up pretty well from a number of angles to attack the business world with kind of a similar mentality, right?
So how did you start playing hockey when you were younger? Why hockey? What was it like growing up playing hockey? Walk me through that piece.
Look, I think if you grow up in Canada, I think today it might be a little bit different. I'm not sure. And I've got 3 young boys, 5, 3, and 18 months. So yep. We'll see how that unfolds. Maybe we do a 10-year reunion, and chat about it. But you grew up in Canada, and obviously hockey's a pretty big thing, and it's a game that parents watch, people watch. It's kind of embedded in the culture, and so as a kid, amongst playing a number of other sports, at least I did, started playing hockey. Actually, I think if I actually think about the history of it, we moved when I was probably around 3, and to the neighborhood. So I was going to, I guess, a new school. I mean, I was just starting school. I was 3, so let's be realistic. And my parents enrolled me in minor hockey as well as skating classes. And so I guess I just liked it, right? Like I can't remember that far back really, but it was a sport that I always loved. And I think that why I tell you about getting enrolled in skating is that I actually did figure skating for 4 or 5, maybe 6 years, as well as playing hockey. And so I think skating, becoming a strong skater early on, probably gave me a little bit of an edge, and I'm just assuming this is the case. And like anything, when you have a little bit of an edge, you gain confidence, and it sort of snowballs from there, right? So you start scoring goals if you're a forward, or you start, controlling the puck more. And so I think it was the one sport that I was probably relatively better at than other sports. And that, like I said, that came with confidence, and then I just went from there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely bang on in terms of finding that edge, and you get confidence, right? Because I started football when I was in grade 7, right? And for me, it was my size. I was getting really big, and I'm like, well, it's easy for me to play football because I'm so big. But then that became into an obsession of, hey, I'm big, I better start working out so I can get better at football. So it started, for me, it was my size. For you, it was figure skating.
Yeah, like I think maybe, there's something to that where once you have that edge, like you said, it was your size, then you started working out. Yeah. You realize that, hey, if I develop or push myself harder or am more disciplined or start working out or start shooting pucks in my garage more than someone else, I'll compound that edge, right? So I think that was it in hockey more than any other game. And once you get closer to the top, there's a lot of guys or girls that have also been doing that, so it gets a little bit tougher. But yeah, it's an interesting idea of a place to start for sure.
So then walk me through when you got to the level of playing, college, right? Now, everybody has been playing hard. They all have been shooting pucks in the garage. Some have been figure skating. Yeah. What gave you that edge to stick it out 4 years and go pro?
Well, I loved it, right? Like it didn't take much more than that. Like I was, you play junior hockey with the goal. Hockey's a unique sport because when you're kind of 16, 15, 16, 17, you kind of have to make a decision where you effectively can almost turn pro equivalent, or you can go to college, but you can't do both, right? And so, you started with talking a little bit about academics, and I was pretty strong academically, and I went to a school that very much emphasized athletic or artistic, whatever your thing was. But in my case, it was more athletic and academic, right? Be strong in both, which I was relatively strong in both. And so I said, you know what, I want to play college. It was a dream. And I think my dad also said it would be so cool if you could, get your education paid for. My mom as well, but get your education paid for and play hockey. I think my dad kind of fantasized college hockey a little bit. And so that was a choice I made, and I kind of worked towards it, and ended up there. Right, you go through the recruiting process, which is interesting and fun. Excuse me. And so, yeah, it never crossed my mind to not stick it out, right? Because it was fun. Like that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to play after college, and I wanted to use my time there as best I could, which is to become a better player. Do well academically to set yourself up for post hockey. And so, yeah, it was something I loved. It was a time in my life that was great. I still have, really close friends from college, and obviously a lot of stories, some that can be told, some that can't. And so yeah, like it was just something I wanted to do.
When I look back, right, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot more now, is when I was busy. So I had football practice, film,
Mm-hmm,
lifting weights, and I had 5 courses a semester.
mm-hmm,
I was able to do the exact same amount of work for school, whether or not the football season was on or off. So now that I look back, I realize that it's all about how efficient we are with our time versus how much time we have.
sure.
So was that also a big thing for you in academic All American, that you were able to handle sports and school because you were very efficient with how you structured your time? And I'm sure you were also at a friend circle there too.
Yeah, no question. Like it's interesting now that like you're kind of firing a bunch of memories looking back, but when you're in that bubble of college hockey, like you're saying, you're 20 hours a week on the ice, whether it's games and practice or lifting, and then you have a full course load as well. And your professors don't necessarily take it easy on you because you're an athlete, right? Like you're just a student. And so I think the structure really helps a lot. That's that idea of scheduling. The blocks of time that you have to do schoolwork or study or be at class, and then you can turn it off, and the blocks of time that you train,
Yeah.
you need to sleep. So that's actually one of the things I try to replicate today. And it's funny because when you leave college and you go play pro, whether it's like minor pro in the East Coast League or the American League, you got all this time. And I swear I went 4 years. I'm like, I didn't have any time, and now I've got all this time.
Yeah.
And to your point, like I don't know that you're definitely not more efficient, right? Like you kind of just you don't use the time as wisely. So it's one thing I try to do today as best I can, which is sort of block my time for various things. And now when there's kids in the mix, that can get kind of thrown offside pretty quickly. But because I think that's now embedded in me in a way where there's work, there's play, there's fitness, there's whatever, if you meditate or do whatever else you do, and just kind of block it to make sure you get it all done and just stay efficient. Yeah.
So, and this reminds me of a stat that I was reading, that most CEOs and executives have an athletic background, right? So would you say this is one of the things that is a part of that foundational things that we learn as athletes, is that the discipline, being really committed to our time, doing more with less? Is that something you've seen you used from your hockey days to now?
Yeah, I would say for sure, right? Like it's just knowing what you need to do to check all those boxes to, stay healthy or eat well, or
Mm-hmm.
not to say I do that now like I did, but yeah, like you can see how that sort of idea of scheduling and the scarcity of time can make sure that when you do have time to do things, you use the time well. And so you can see, I didn't know that most executives have an athletic background, but it makes sense.
Yeah, because I was in a different podcast. I was chatting with Mr. Dell Jones. So he was an 18-year reporter for USA Today. And he shared a stat that most executives have athletic backgrounds, but also most female executives, even though numbers are lower for various reasons that exist today, which is a problem. Most female executives also have an athletic background, which
Yeah.
almost shows you that there's some sort of a foundational value stream that is embedded, I think, in most people
Yeah,
from
like
that.
I actually just heard a podcast which is incredible. Who a guy named Patrick O'Shaughnessy, Invest Like the Best. I don't know if you know the podcast. It's phenomenal. He does a great job. And he had, I forget her last name now. I should know, but I think her first name is Claire, and she's one of the executives at Heinz. And it seems like she's got 10 full-time jobs, does amazing at all of them,
Wow.
and is a former USA track superstar, right? And I think that she talks a little bit about that, how like track not only gave her that structure, but it also gave her a mindset that allowed her to, really take quick steps in the business world. And it's a fascinating listen for anyone out there that wants to listen. Claire, she's from Heinz, Claire and Patrick O'Shaughnessy, one of these podcasts. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think there's so many things that make that transition, right? Like I work with some student athletes now, and I know we're diving into this a little deeper, but a lot of student athletes that, come to me and say, well, you know what, I was 4 years in school, and I was playing, whatever sport for most of my time. I didn't take any mock interview lessons. I didn't work on my resume. I didn't do an internship. I'm like, but you have all the transferable skills that you
Sure.
need, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot more value to that. But I want to ask you, Darcy. So, thinking about how these things have helped you in life, when you look back at your career from hockey to, I know you had your own business and now Greybrook, what is one or two values that have stuck with you from your hockey days, whether junior or NCAA, that you're always constantly saying the reason you're doing well today is because of these values?
Yeah, I think there's more than one or two, but I think that attitude is a big one.
Yep.
And when I think about attitude, it's not just being a good teammate and stuff like that. It's how you approach the game or how you approach the sport. Like when I think about the people that I was around that became even much more, however you define success, successful and call it hockey than I was, more successful than I was. They were so convinced in their mind that they were going to make it, and they ended up making it, right? So this is something that I've actually taken forward from sports, and I probably realized it. I did realize it too late, but I'm glad I realized it. Was just that if you look back, oftentimes they are better, but oftentimes they're not. They're kind of right in the middle or upper middle of the pack, but they're so convinced that they're going to make, play pro, that they almost will themselves to get there. So like that idea of literally willing yourself to get somewhere if you really, really want it blew me away when I realized it. But that's the reality of pretty much anyone who's been successful, right? Whether you call it visualization or, whatever they're doing, that was striking. And the other thing that I think is quite interesting, and like you can kind of parlay it into just having faith, right? And I don't mean that in a spiritual way necessarily. I mean it in just faith in yourself, right? Like that it's going to work out. And if you have that, then anything that comes across that's negative or difficult, like you can kick in that gear of persistence that will keep you going, right? So like those two things, and I know there's others that, I probably should highlight and I'm not, are the two things that really stand out.
The second thing you said, it reminds me of a concept that an Olympian was actually talking about. He said, look at your efforts, your life in a long-term horizon, where anything that comes up that is not part of your plan, don't think of it as a failure. Think of it as how are you going to navigate this? How will you use this to learn and adjust your plan, iterate, so that you can continue moving to that long-term 3 to 4 year journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very similar to what you said for a second. It's like, that something might come up, but if you're persistent, because of football, hockey, football, whatever it is, you're going to continue making progress, right? So I think it's a very, very, very unique concept. And then the first one you mentioned, there's this book, The Secret, right? I mean, there's different things that you can lay it to. It's like either as a power of visualization or the power of whatever. Like, if you think you can do something, you're going to start doing the things that get you. That it becomes the action you take are what you believe that you want to do. So I think there's different ways of saying that as well.
Yeah,
Very
sure.
true.
For sure. It's a tough thing to articulate. You almost just have to see it for it to register, right? Like everyone, when you get up the ranks, everyone wants it and everyone wants to be the best and everyone wants to get to the next level, but not everyone has, and everyone works hard and everyone lifts weights and personal bests and all these things, but not everyone is really willing to do it and not everyone's mindset is where it needs to be to get there. So yeah, like all these things kind of go hand in hand.
So let's dive into the second point there. When things come up that aren't part of your plan, how do you handle failures, and how's hockey taught you to handle adversity?
I think hockey is one of those things where you constantly have to keep going, right? Like you're almost only in any sport, you're only really, some ways you're as good as your last game, and it's very much merit based. You know, some people can debate that, I guess, but merit based where like if you're playing well and doing well, you're going to move up. And so if you know that, then anytime you fail, you hear it a lot in the startup world is fail fast or whatever it is, fail often and fail fast. But it gives you that ability to, if it's merit based and you have a sort of end goal, you just take those failures, you learn from them and move on, right? And I think hockey's no different. The one thing about hockey that might be different than some other sports is that you're doing it as a team, and so your team can learn together, and you can rely on others to sort of prop you up, which is one of the things that I like about business as well, is that unless you're a solo entrepreneur, you can kind of rely on others to either pick up the slack or be creative or take their idea. But I think just having an end goal, having a vision, and knowing that, if you keep doing what you're doing and you're confident, you can sort of, it will run off your back. The one thing I would say about failure is that sometimes I think it's very much, like the thing to say, that idea of fail often and fail fast. And I think failure has a very negative connotation to it. I think it's more about, what you're learning and being willing to try things. Obviously, you want them to succeed, but giving yourself that space to try something and being creativity within a framework, to me, is really what it's all about, and less so about like, did you fail? Well, what'd you learn from your fail? Like, it's more around that idea of creativity from trying to do something different within a framework, and at least trying, right?
I was writing a blog last week, and it was called "Change the Definition of Failure," because basically, what might seem a failure to somebody else, for at least for me personally, I've been through this in corporate. For me, it was like, if I didn't fail here, I probably wouldn't have achieved the results that I got a year later, because that set me up to learn and then try something else that otherwise I wouldn't have known, right? So I think it's all about how you're perceiving failure. It's more of, I call it execution, right? Execute, learn, get the feedback, and you repeat.
Yeah, exactly. It can also light a fire under you too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I know, my first pro team, like we had a pretty good team, and I kind of probably didn't get the shot that I thought I would, or just it didn't work out, and I ended up getting traded, and that totally sparks you, right? Because you're like, well, this could be it. This could be it. Like I didn't do as well as I could have in round one. Round two, if I don't do as well as I can, like it could be over. Yeah. And so it sparks you a little bit too, to just pay attention to, what you maybe didn't do well and what you did do well, and focus on the things that you can do well and do well.
Yeah, I remember I got benched a few games, and that was the next week when I came back to practice was absolutely different intensity than the week before.
Yeah. So. Desperation mode now.
Exactly. You mentioned, Darcy, about a team sport, right? So you were playing with a
Hmm.
bunch of other players. Now, business, and you said business is you have people around you, right? There are too
Hmm.
many people, unfortunately, in today's world that are going to work, that are part of a team that does not do well, that don't like each other, and they're okay with it. I'm sure you are in a firm, and I think you get along well with people, but you also are part of a team who wants to strive to get better. How do you find that kind of a team in a business environment? And now we're talking about your transition from sports. Two, what can people do that are part of a team that just is more political and more talk versus doing the actual things that are going to get them to win?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's that can be a tricky thing to find, right? Like you can in business, you can end up on a team that's the case, and it's a hard thing to shake out of people, right? And so I think that's where culture, values, vision play a pretty important role, in so much as you want to join a firm where you're very much aligned with all of those things, right? And so, like if you look at a lot of the consulting firms or whatever, like that they're going to be attracting high performing people. And if that's the culture and the vibe and the feel you want, learning from other smart people, that's also very competitive, hard work, learning interesting things, and that's your makeup, then try to find a culture where the majority of the teams are going to be like that, right? Versus, and I think that would be the case in a lot of progressive industries like technology or any tech firms where people are pushing forward, versus maybe in some older type businesses it's more of like a low growth environment, which not, I don't know this to be the case for sure, but I can imagine it's a little bit more hold the fort down than it is push forward, right? So I think there's a lot of things that would go into making a decision of, hey, well, what kind of person am I? What kind of culture and what are my values? And what do I want to be associated with? And then start there as a point to sort of give yourself the best chance to be on a team that is going to be the type of team you want.
Yeah, it's also you bring up a good point about some of these older businesses, right? And a lot of times it was the case when I'm sure when you went to university, it was probably like front and center that go work for a big company, you get a big name on your resume. That means you can go to other bigger companies afterwards. The problem that I'm seeing right now, my experience, but also hearing from others, is that the bigger companies just don't move as fast.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to learn and if you want to be part of a culture that's going to grow, go to a smaller company or an entrepreneurial environment within a bigger company where you have the autonomy to make mistakes and the autonomy to learn. And also that's meritocratic, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
definitely changing.
Yeah, it seems like it is. Like I think that there's two parts to that. I think like oftentimes in bigger businesses there's this knowledge base and people where you can learn from them. Like a lot of people talk about like investment banking or consulting, and I think there you can learn very tangible skills that can parlay into now you have these skills that you can use elsewhere. But I certainly would agree with you that I think that I think it's Seth Godin or one of those, I think it's him, where he says like, what feels like the most traditional or comfortable path or the least risky path oftentimes can be the highest risk, because you imagine you go into a firm, you learn the skills, now you're getting paid pretty well, you kind of follow the track, now you're 5, 7, 10 years in. Are you really going to leave because you got a pretty good gig going, but now you're in your mid 40s or whatever the age, and all of a sudden they let you go and you don't have these skills that you can necessarily use elsewhere. You can't jump into a tech firm, right? So
Yep.
I think when you're talking earlier about giving advice to people, and I actually hosted a guest on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and he gave similar advice. And I always think that, like, don't just follow the path to follow the path. Like, follow your passion or something that you like, try it, and to your point, make mistakes, but try a number of different things before you settle on your the path that's going to create the greatest trajectory for you. And I think a lot of times you can get caught up in taking the job that's either going to pay the best or that's been the traditional path, and you in some ways miss the boat.
Yeah. Talking about business, right? Where you're applying a lot of these things. So let's talk about Greybrook. Really curious. And I always ask this question to every single athlete on the podcast, Darcy. How have you applied the actual strategy side of your sport? So let's say hockey, everything is like, a lot of people don't realize that even when you have the playoffs, people are running around. There's a lot more strategy that goes behind it than what you see on the camera. So that's strategy. We're on a team with people that you might not always like, right? You're looking at building leadership and taking advice from others on the team. You got to be part of a system, right? That you might not believe in or you have to believe in. How do you bring all those stuff into your business today, and how are you applying those concepts from a very business 101 standpoint?
Yeah, I think, similar to sports, and I think a lot of it starts at the top, right? Like, if you step back, I think one of the things that is obvious, but maybe I implemented it later than I could have, is that I think coaching is important, not dissimilar to sports, right? Like if you surround yourself with good people that are smart, that are growing, or associate yourself with people that you ultimately want to be or have the life that they have, these things are important. So you start there. And then two, when you get into like business 101, I think not dissimilar to a team, you want to create roles that are well defined and well respected. And so, if you take hockey, for example, there's forwards, defensemen, and goalie, and then there's subsets in there which are goal scorers or defensive forwards and offensive defensemen and defensive defensemen. And so everyone has a role to play, and everyone's role is important. And you can't lose sight of that, even though some people might take more of the glory because they're the goal scorer. The team doesn't win without the rest of the team. So this idea of roles that are well defined and respected by everyone on the team is very important. And then also just that sense of purpose, right? Like a team is pretty straightforward. You want to win the championship, and how do you go about doing that? But I think if you align incentives, the mission, the culture, you give people sort of autonomy, you empower them, again, throughout the team, not just the top dog, then the entity will move together. And that's ultimately what you want.
It's well said. How do you talk about the roles now? So well-defined roles. I think before you can move together, you got to have well-defined roles. What are your thoughts on, Darcy, having people that can play multiple positions or generalists, right? So if you have, let's say, depth, somebody get injured, how do you account for that?
So I think it's very important, right? Like I think you don't want to leave yourself with a glaring hole if something happens, right? So I think you need to sort of create ways to sort of backfill for other people's roles to a certain extent. I like the idea of generalists, to be honest. Like, I guess it goes a little bit against what sort of you say earlier in well-defined roles. By that, I just mean this is what you need to do to get where we want to go.
Expectation of your job. Yep.
Exactly. But I think being a generalist allows you to fundamentally, so by generalist, say there's like three things that you kind of have to oversee, but there's one thing that you need to be really good at and responsible for. By being a generalist, you have a more comprehensive view of the business and what other people are doing. And there it gives you respect for the effort and work they're doing. But it also allows you to, if someone does go down, to be able to pick up that slack, right? And I think that generalists, just generally, like, you generalists generally, you hear a lot of people that are like these polymaths that, are really exceptionally talented at multiple subjects. Not that we all need to be that, but I think there's a lot of valuable lessons that you can take from one area and bring over to yours and either use it to get better or just to give you a more comprehensive understanding. So I think not being siloed is important. And the idea of generalists, at least in terms of what you read and things that you're sort of learning from, is quite important.
So on this note, what can other executives right now take away from hockey? Let's say just on the aspect of teams and building the right team that's worked for you or you believe will work good for businesses who are trying to battle disruption today?
Yeah, I think it's, even in the interview process, sussing out the ability to problem solve and be resilient, right? Like start there. And then, as you plug those problem solvers and resilient people into certain roles, you're going to by design have resiliency and flexibility, right? So if things get disruptive, you can adjust and adapt. If you don't have people that have that resiliency and flexibility, then if something goes wrong or the ship takes a wrong turn, you're going to be in trouble. So beyond all the things that we said, which is roles, mission, purpose, like incentives, all of these things, I think it's just finding people that at their core have these traits and plug them into the team. Like I think I don't know that there's a way to do it other than that.
Awesome. For everyone listening, can you provide a little bit of information on your podcast, Venture and Gains?
Yeah, we talked about generalists. So Venture and Gains, it's basically, I say, everyone has a handful of people or less in their network that everything they touch turns to gold, and no matter what they do, they're successful. And so we all kind of want to meet more of those people and learn from them. So that's kind of the ethos of the podcast. And it very much is a generalist approach. So it's not, I'm in real estate private equity for my day job, and I've been doing that for, I guess, almost 8 years now. But it's not just real estate people. Like there are some that are sort of in that handful, but it's people across industries, across roles, whether it's, media, tech, real estate, you name it, and just trying to suss out, like, similar to kind of, I guess, what we're doing today, like these elements of how they think, what they do, how they approach their day, and some of the hurdles that they've overcome along the way. And it actually started in a very different way, though. I used to there's this kind of social club in Toronto where I still am a member at, and one of the things they wanted to do is attract younger members. So I said, well, what'd be interesting is to bring in entrepreneurs or funds or asset managers to present to a group, but not just present to say like, hey, this is what we do, but to kind of like not pitch a deal, but like pitch their VC fund or their strategy or their business. And over time, the room started to fill up. And all I was doing was saying, hey, bring this person in, fill the room, and those people can connect and go from there. And then once COVID hit, I said, it was an interesting way to build a network too. You build a very diverse network because you're not just focusing on one thing. So for people out there, like I always kind of like, you can get stuck in your network. So I kind of wanted to build a network beyond just my network.
Yep.
So once COVID hit, I said, well, how can you replicate that digitally? And that's what started the podcast, which is doing a similar thing, just digitally.
It's an awesome story. Where can people find that?
ventureandgains.com is the website. The firm I'm working at today is, and have been for a while and probably will be for quite a long time, is Greybrook Realty Partners. So yeah, check us out. Check out the podcast. Love people to listen. There's a lot of interesting guests, and season 2 is about to drop in a couple of weeks. So hopefully you can check it out.
Awesome. Well, Darcy, thanks so much for jumping on. It's been a pleasure having you. Everyone listening, remember to check out Venture and Gains, and make sure to leave a nice review and subscribe to the podcast. And Darcy, thanks again, man. It's a pleasure having you.
No, it's great. Love what you're doing. I think there's tons that people can apply, whether they're professional, collegiate, or elsewhere, sports into business. And so you take a great angle and you do a great job. So thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care.
Team, remember to like, subscribe, and share with a friend, and visit tambourvango.com for a ton of free content and exercises.